In this series, we're going to go over cards in the Commander ban list, talk about why they're banned, and what the arguments for unbanning them are. Before we start, it's worth mentioning that since Commander is a casual format, there's even more ambiguity about what a ban list should be than there usually is. Starting us off, we have Coalition Victory. This is a sorcery with a mana cost of 3 and 1 mana of each color for a total of 8 mana. It has the effect where, if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color, you win the game. This card was banned in March of 2007. Why was Coalition Victory banned? The card was much better at stealing games to Commander than in just about every other format. The thing that makes it so much easier to accomplish this is the fact that you have a Commander. The thing is, Victory doesn't ask you to have one creature for each color, it only checks to see for each color if one of your creatures is that color. So basically, if you have one creature that's all 5 colors, that's all you need for the Victory to go off on the creature front. As far as getting a land of each land type, that's really not very hard either. The best mana bases are built around the fetch lands, which work by searching lands from your deck based on their land types. Combining this with the shock lands and the triomes, which each have 2 or 3 basic land types respectively, and it's very easy to get all 5 land types in play. This leads to Coalition Victory basically saying 8 mana, win the game. The issue with this is that, in the eyes of the rules committee, this leads to very uninteresting and anticlimactic games. Now, this isn't something that would come up in most formats, but the casual nature of Commander makes it so this is more of a legitimate concern. Coalition Victory kinda just comes out of nowhere. If you're playing a 5-color deck, no one's really going to blink twice at your Commander being on the battlefield. And because people aren't really going to even notice if you have all 5 land types or not, the end result is that Coalition Victory being live completely flies under the radar. Since the card was kind of just unfun and led to disappointing games, it was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Coalition Victory? The main argument is that there are other cards that basically say win the game at this mana cost. Cards like Expropriate and Insurrection are usually just as game winning due to the amount of value or damage they give you. And while this is true, there are a few notable differences. Namely that those cards need more cards to be on board in order to close out a game. Coalition Victory doesn't require anywhere near as much setup, as getting your commander out is very easy and the land thing will usually be accomplished by accident. Still, this difference is pretty small. I could go either way on the card being banned. While it isn't actually that bad, it is still really annoying. I could see keeping it banned just to make the format a bit more fun. Next up, we have Biorhythm. This is a sorcery with a mana cost of 6 and 2 green. It has the effect where each player's life total becomes equal to the number of creatures they control. This card was banned in April of 2005. So why was Biorhythm banned? It basically does what Coalition Victory does, but way worse. For the same amount of mana, Biorhythm will bring every player in the game to just a few life. If you then clear your opponent's board, Biorhythm will literally just kill them by setting their life to 0. If you use a card like Cyclonic Rift on your opponent's end step or a card like the Great Aurora to reset the board and draw into your Biorhythm, your opponent's boards will be cleared of creatures. As long as you have at least one creature when you cast Biorhythm, you'll live while each of your opponents will die. What makes Biorhythm so much worse is that it's not restricted to only seen plain 5-color decks. Biorhythm can be shoved into any green deck, it'll function as a powerful I win the game button in basically every creature-based deck. Another thing that makes it very annoying is how punishing it is for creature-light decks. Lots of decks are built around using very few creatures and playing a more controlling game plan, usually ending in some sort of combo. While actual control decks are rare in the format, tons of decks like Kess, Dissident Mage are often more focused on playing lots of powerful instants and sorceries than filling the board with creatures. So they're likely to only have a tiny bit of life after a Biorhythm resolves. The worst part of this is that your opponent doesn't even need to be doing anything for Biorhythm to basically just kill them, as they'd never have enough creatures to realistically live through the card. Due to how good it was at cheesing wins, Biorhythm was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Biorhythm? Very similarly to Coalition Victory, people argue that other cards win the game for the same amount of mana. A card that gets brought up a lot in these conversations is Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, which lets you pay 9 and 2 green for Biorhythm's effect if you have creatures with total power of 8 or greater. The argument is usually that Shaman doesn't see any play, so surely Biorhythm has to be fine, right? This is a really bad comparison though for multiple reasons. Namely, Shaman has to sit on the field for a full turn to be able to activate, giving your opponent ample time to respond. The thing that makes Biorhythm difficult to deal with is that it just comes out of nowhere, similar to the other I win the game buttons we've talked about. All in all, Biorhythm could probably be mostly okay to come back. It's not too much worse than the other big expensive sorceries that players have access to. The main issue is that it's just one of the only cards in the category that can, by itself, actually kill a player. This is a unique function that puts Biorhythm in a category distinct from these other cards, but that's not that big of a deal. It's certainly a card that could come off the ban list and be fine, though it would be pretty annoying. Next up, we have Panoptic Mirror. This is an artifact with a mana cost of 5. It has the abilities where you can pay X and tap it to exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can cast a copy of a card exiled with a mirror without paying its mana cost. This card was also banned in April of 2005. Why was Panoptic Mirror banned? Panoptic Mirror can easily win you the game if you imprint the right card onto it. Namely, what you're looking for is an extra turn spell. Since this will give you another upkeep, you'll get an extra turn on that extra turn, and then another one, and then another one, and so on and so on. Basically forever. Once you're taking all the turns in the game, you've basically won. Your opponent won't be able to do anything, and even if they do have mana for interactions, if they don't stop you the right way, you'll be able to wait until you've drawn the protection spells you need and have played enough lands that you'll be able to play around all their interactions anyway. Since this card was able to win you the game so easily, the card was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Panoptic Mirror? I'll be honest, I don't see why this one is still banned, as there are better and more efficient combos that can be slotted into tons of decks. Combos like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Constellation let you win the game on the spot for just 3 mana, and are one of the most powerful and consistently used combos all the way up in CEDH. So, why aren't one of those 2 cards banned? Well, because they aren't played at casual tables that often. The worry with the previous random I win the game cards is that they'd see too much play at lower power level tables where they don't belong. So while these cards are far less powerful, they may be more problematic in a casual setting. So the real question is, would Panoptic Mirror see too much play at weaker tables? I really don't think so. There are tons of similar 2-card combos that win you the game that aren't banned that are about as useful as the pieces for the mirror combo individually. For example, one of the most common combos for black decks is Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood. These are each 5-mana enchantments that make it so that gaining life makes your opponent lose that much life, and whenever your opponent loses life, you gain that much life respectively. These cards are great for any black deck that cares about gaining life, and see tons of play together and separately throughout the format. Though if you're playing Exquisite Blood, most people will toss in a Sanguine Bond effect for the heck of it anyway. So I really don't see any way in which Panoptic Mirror is more problematic than these other combo cards. It really seems like a fangless ban overall. Next up, we have Reoccurring Nightmare. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 2 and 1 black. It is the ability where you sacrifice a creature and return Recurring Nightmare to its owner's hand to return target creature card from graveyard to the battlefield. And also, you can only activate this card as a sorcery. This card was banned in February of 2008. Why was Reoccurring Nightmare banned? Nightmare was mostly banned due to how it works with priority. You see, how things work in Magic is that the active player, the player whose turn it is, gets to act first. And then each opponent in turn order gets to act each time a player gets priority. So what happens is a player casts Nightmare. That player gets a chance to act. Then each of their opponents do. If no one does anything, Nightmare will just resolve and go into play. Now, the messed up part is what happens next. Since it's your turn, you get to act first, and you can immediately activate Nightmare to reanimate something. The important thing here is that the returning Nightmare to your hand thing is technically a cost. So what happens is, as soon as the card resolves, you can bounce Nightmare to your hand before your opponents have a chance to do anything. This means that even if your opponent has something like Naturalize to answer your Nightmare, if you do the smart thing of always going right to activate your Nightmare, they'll never be able to pop it. The ability to get a repeatable reanimate that your opponent can't pop was extremely powerful, so the card was banned. Now, what are the arguments for unbanning Reoccurring Nightmare? I'll be honest, I really think the card should come back. I really don't think the card is problematic in any way. Sure, you can't interact with Nightmare with Naturalize effects, but why exactly would you think that's how you'd want to answer the card? You answer the Nightmare the same way you answer other reanimation spells, with Graveyard Hate. Cards like Tormund's Crypt, Grafdigger's Cage, and Silent Gravestone are all colorless cards that answer Graveyard interaction, not only stopping Nightmare, but stopping all of the much more powerful reanimation spells in the format. Reanimate, Exhume, Animate Dead, and Persist are all better reanimation spells than Nightmare are. Nightmare would still be the 5th best reanimation spell in the format if it were unbanned. Now, some people would argue that getting to use it repeatedly makes it better, but this usually won't actually matter. If what you're trying to do is win the game, you should be saving your reanimation spells for cards like Protean Hulk or Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, cards that let you win the game 90% of the times when you get them in play. The ability to loop creatures in hand and out of your graveyard isn't really necessary for reanimation spells to do so. The fact that Reoccurring Nightmare encourages this is actually why it's perfect for the format. Nightmare encourages playing a very grindy, value-based game, which is what Commander is all about. The fact that it is repeatable is what makes it such a great fit for the format. While you can use it for getting out those powerful creatures, the fact that it shines the most in more value-based strategies will push people away from using it for combos, which leans more into what the format was designed for. Reoccurring Nightmare would add far more to the format than it would take away, and it would be an amazing unban. Next up, we have Gifts Ungiven. This is an instant with a mana cost of 3 and 1 blue. It is the effect where you search your library for up to 4 cards with different names. Target opponent chooses 2 of them. You put those cards into your graveyard and the rest into your hand, then shuffle. Gifts Ungiven was banned in June of 2009. Why was Gifts Ungiven banned? Gifts is so good at finding combo piles that if you cast it, you'll usually be able to win the game on the next turn. The line differs a ton based on exactly what deck you're playing. Storm decks that are built on casting lots of spells on one turn before killing the table with an Aetherflux Reservoir, will usually find piles with some numbers of rituals, draw spells, and most importantly, Past in Flames. This is a sorcery that gives all instants and sorceries in your graveyard flashback, where the flashback cost is equal to their mana cost. This lets you cast it from your graveyard, but you have to exile it afterwards. Most importantly, it has a flashback cost itself, so no matter where your opponent puts it, you'll be able to flashback your entire graveyard next turn. This is what makes Gifts so powerful. It basically lets you tutor for 2 cards if you really want to. You could just grab 2 cards you want and then 2 regrowth effects with different names so you can just grab the cards from your graveyard right away. And considering how we've already talked about a number of 2-card combos in this video, it's obvious how easy it is to win the game after it gifts. What pushes it over the edge is the fact that it's an instant. This means that you can cast it at the end of your opponent's turn right before your turn to set up your combo, and then untap and try to win the game. Thanks to just how strong this card was at letting combo off and win, the card was banned. Now, what are the arguments for unbanning Gifts Ungiven? One of the biggest sticking points in the discussion around the card is the fact that intuition exists and is completely legal. This is an instant with a mana cost of 2 and 1 blue with the effect where you search your library for 3 cards, reveal them, then your opponent chooses one of those cards. You put that chosen card into your hand and the others into your graveyard. Intuition is a very old card, and a reserve list card at that, meaning Wizards has promised to never reprint the card. Combining this with the fact that it's basically a better Gifts Ungiven has caused a bit of a commotion in the community. The issue is that it seems very pay to win. You can still play this very powerful effect, but only if you shell out the very high amount of money for the older and harder to get intuition. You can't replace it with the cheaper option as you normally would in this case, since the cheaper version of the effect, Gifts Ungiven, is banned. This means that the player who's willing to pay more money is the only one who gets access to this effect, which doesn't make anyone happy. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Gifts should be unbanned. You could make a very strong argument that Intuition should catch a ban alongside Gifts. You could even make the argument that Intuition should be banned and Gifts should come off the ban list, since Intuition is a more powerful card. On top of all this, it's debatable about how good Gifts Ungiven even is. Sure, it's a powerful combo enabler, but most of the combos it can set up do cost quite a bit of mana. It's not that much better than the other tutors in the format. Demonic Tutor is totally legal in the format and just lets you grab a card for half the mana with no questions asked. If Gifts was unbanned, CEDH would almost certainly pass it up in favor of the cheaper and more efficient tutors that are already available to them. The best response to this is, in my mind, that Gifts doesn't really do much besides let you set up big combos. Demonic Tutor can be used to find specific answers, like for example, finding the graveyard hit you really need to stop a Reanimator deck. Sometimes you won't be able to win off of a DT, so it makes sense to just stop your opponent from winning. Since Gifts finds so many cards, it only ever really makes sense to go find your 2-card combo, since you can always find both pieces. The best solution in my mind is just to hit both Gifts and Intuition, but just about every position here does at least have a leg to stand on. Alright, and that's the video. If you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.